Okay, so I wanted to do some extra practice with factor by grouping, and I really just want to target these four-term polynomials in this factor by grouping. When I start mixing binomials and trinomials and quadrinomials all together, sometimes students get, lost. So I just want to target four-term polynomials, and once you feel you've mastered those, then you move on to your trinomials and your binomials. But let's just start with this lovely four-term polynomial here. I'll rewrite it. B squared plus 2b plus, so this is very similar to your online homework, so we get good practice together. A lot of math, I'd be lying if I, didn't say, a lot of math at this point is rinse and repeat, drill and repetition, drill and repetition. You have to gain the skill set, and then you move on to applications after that. So, okay, factor by grouping. First thing we do is we inspect. Is there a GCF for all four terms? And it's like, do all four terms have something in common? And they don't all have a B, they don't all have a Q, and they don't have a number in common. So you say, first thing you say is, okay, no GCF for the entire polynomial. So then you mentally, and I'm drawing a little dashed line here, you see it, mentally drawing that dashed line, okay? And then what I'm going to do, and you've probably seen my other podcasts, pull the GCF of the first two terms alone, which is B. You're going to be left with B plus 2. This here plus sign, just keep it. Sometimes I just record it. Then look at the last two terms, 7BQ and 14Q. What's the GCF of the last two terms? Well, 7 and the Q, right? If you pull that GCF of the last two terms, and even if you have to note to self here, last two terms, GCF of last two terms. Okay, 7Q. If you pull that GCF out, what were you going to be left with? B plus 2. And then you say, aha, and I'm going to pull a different color here. Aha, notice that this quantity matches this quantity. That's not coincidence. Whatever matches will become one set of parentheses, and the leftover guys, the B plus 7Q, will become the other set of parentheses. Now, in a previous podcast, I talked about why that is. It's really that the entire binomial, B plus 2, is a GCF. So it's sometimes hard for people to see that initially, but know that the quantity that matches will become one set of parentheses, and the leftover guys, the B plus 7Q, will become the other set of parentheses. So big note to self, notice your final answer is a binomial times another binomial. So in other words, you don't want to, a lot of people get to this step here and they leave it accidentally. You want to take it to that final phase, meaning your final answer is something that you could FOIL. Use FOIL, first, outer, inner, last, good old multiply. You could multiply these two binomials and see if you send yourself back to the original, right? So, okay, on the next slide, actually, just to convince you, you have to do a lot of these in your book and convince yourself that that is the mechanism for getting them right. So 2mn minus 2ny minus 5m plus 5y. Okay, again, I'm just going to draw that invisible dotted line. Pull the GCF of the first two terms only, which is 2n. And what would you be left with? M minus y. Then if I inspect the second two terms, you might be inclined to say the GCF is 5. Let's try pulling a negative 5 and see what happens. And then you'd be left with m minus, how come minus? Because a negative times a negative is a positive, right? So careful there. So m minus y. Aha, once again, I'm going to grab a different color here. Once again, this quantity matches this quantity. Sometimes I even note to self there, match. It's not coincidence that that matches. That's sort of by design. It's the way factor by grouping is going to work, as long as you performed it okay, right? So m minus y times m minus y, you're going to get your match. That entire binomial there becomes, in essence, its own GCF. So we pull that m minus y as one set of parentheses, and the other set of parentheses is going to be the 2n, the leftover guys, the 2n minus 5. Okay, and once again, we're arriving at a binomial times a binomial, something that, note to self, we could multiply if we felt like it to check our answer, to check that we get all the way back to the original. So if you multiply this times this using FOIL or whatever method you use, box method or something, you'll get back to the original. Okay, hope that helps. I didn't want this podcast to be too long, so by now, again, so now you see this example, factor by grouping, that's the final answer, and I just back to the other one, that's the final answer on that one as well. Okay, good luck.